The storm came at dawn, not with rain, but with hooves and rage. Elias woke to the sound first, the low thunder of horses rolling up the main street, the clatter of spurs, voices sharp as whip cracks. He was on his feet before thought had time to catch him, the old instinct burning awake in his blood. He snatched the gun belt from the chair, leather creaking as he fastened it tight. Through the window, the sky bled pink over the prairie, but it wasn't the sunrise that set his teeth on edge. It was the men coming with it. He stepped into the hallway, boots striking wood like a drumbeat. From behind the door at the end, he heard the faint rustle of movement. Clara. The name brushed his thoughts like a hand he couldn't shake loose. He'd left her curled in that bed last night, eyes too wide for sleep, skin pale as moonlight. She'd looked like a girl who'd run every mile of hell and found no gate at the end. He should have asked more, pressed harder. But he hadn't. Maybe part of him hadn't wanted to know what shadows followed her. Now those shadows wore spurs. Outside, voices rose, angry and sure. One cut through the rest a man's voice, thick with drink and hatred. Elias knew the sound of vengeance when it spoke. He strode to her door and opened it without knocking. Clara was already sitting up, hair loose around her face, quilt clutched tight against her chest. Her eyes locked on him, wild but sharp. "They're here," he said. For a breath, she didn't move. Then the blood drained from her face, and he had his answer without asking. Whoever waited outside belonged to the life she'd tried to bury on that prairie road. "Tell me," he said. His tone left no room for lies. Her throat worked, words scraping out low. "My husband." She shook her head quick, as if to tear the word loose. "Not husband, not anymore. He bought me. Thought that made me his. I ran. He doesn't take kindly to losing." Elias's jaw clenched, until it hurt. The weight of her fear filled the room like smoke. He could taste the truth of it, bitter and old. Men like that didn't come to talk. They came to claim, to break what dared to slip their leash. "You stay here," he said. Her fingers knotted in the quilt. "Elias, he'll kill you." "Let him try." Something flickered in her eyes' terror. Yes, but something else under it. Something that caught like a spark, and held. She opened her mouth, but he was already gone, the door shutting soft behind him. The street boiled with men. 4, maybe 5 faces raw with anger, hands resting easy on gun grips. The one in front sat high in the saddle, shoulders thick, eyes pale and mean. His mouth curled when he saw Elias step off the porch. "McGrath," the man drawled. "Heard. You picked up something that don't belong to you." Elias walked into the dust-swept street, slow and steady. The town had gone, silent doors cracked, curtains twitching. Boone stood near the hitching post, his hand close to his own iron, eyes cutting between them like a gambler weighing odds. Elias didn't look his way. His gaze stayed on the man in the saddle. "She ain't yours," Elias said. The man spat. "Into the dirt. Paid good money for her. Papers signed. World works on that, don't it?" "World works on what a man can live with," Elias said, voice flat as a blade. "You ride out now. You keep breathing. You stay, you don't." The man laughed. It was a sound that scraped bone. He swung down from the saddle, boots punching dust. The others shifted, the ripple of men tasting blood. Elias felt the heat crawl his spine, the old quiet that came before killing. His thumb eased the strap on his holster, slow as a heartbeat. Behind him, he sensed movement, a shadow at the boarding house door. Clara stood there, one hand clutching the frame, the other curled tight at her side. Her eyes burned into him, wide and pleading. He didn't turn. Couldn't. This was his to finish. The man squared up, close enough Elias could smell whiskey on his breath. "You think you're some kind of savior?" he sneered. "You think she's worth dying for?" Elias didn't answer. He let silence speak, heavy as lead. The man's grin cracked, widened, then his hand moved, a blur of muscle and brass. Elias was faster. The gun leaped from his holster like it had been waiting all its life. One shot split the morning loud enough to shake the sky. The man's pistol never cleared leather. His body jerked, eyes going wide, and he crumpled into the dust, blood spreading black in the dawn light. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the others cursed and clawed for their guns. Elias pivoted, boots grinding, and the street roared alive. Lead tore the air, punched splinters from the hitching post, shattered a water barrel in a spray of silver. Elias moved like water through Stoneleigh, sure, each shot a question with only one answer. Two men dropped, screaming into silence. The others broke, spurs ringing as they spurred their mounts and fled into the burning edge of sunrise. Smoke coiled lazy from the barrel of Elias's Colt. His chest heaved, breath tasting of iron and dust. Boone stepped out slow, jaw tight, eyes scanning the ruin. He opened his mouth, shut it, and gave a single, sharp nod. Law had its lines. Today, Elias had drawn his own. He turned. Clara was still in the doorway, hands trembling against the frame. Her face was white, lips parted, eyes wide with something he couldn't read. Fear, relief, both tangled like roots in dark soil. For a long beat, they just stared at each other across the empty street, the weight of gun smoke and choice hanging heavy between them. Elias walked toward her, boots sinking deep into the hush. When he reached the porch, he stopped, hat brim shadowing his eyes. "It's over," he said. She shook her head, voice breaking soft. "It's never over." Maybe she was right. Men like that left scars that didn't fade when the blood dried. But he looked at her early-looked hand, saw something shift, the wild terror that had burned in her since the prairie was dimming, making room for something else. Something like breath after drowning. "Come inside," she whispered. Not a plea this time, not a bargain. Just words heavy with everything neither of them could name. He followed her in. The door closed on the street, on the whispers that would crawl like vines through town before noon. Inside, the air was warm, close. Clara stood by the window, hands twisting in her skirt. When she turned, her eyes caught his, and for one raw second, the world went still. "Why?" she asked. Just that. A single word, worn and aching. Elias could have told her the truth, that he didn't know. That maybe he'd been waiting years for something that felt like worth, and it had found him in a broken woman on a broken road. That mercy had near starved in him, and she'd fed it back to life. But he said none of that. Words had never been his gift, so he gave her the only thing he had, the quiet, and the way his gaze held hers like a vow. Outside, the wind rose, stirring dust along the tracks of men who wouldn't return. Inside, two souls stood in the hush, tethered by something too fierce and too fragile for names, and somewhere beyond the walls. The prairie stretched endless, waiting, because nothing in this land ever stayed still for long, and some stories, the kind worth bleeding for, were only just beginning. The sky was burning down to embers when Elias McGrath saw the shape on the prairie. At first, he thought it was a shadow the dying sun had thrown across the earth, long and still and broken. But then the shape moved, barely. A hand, thin and shaking, clawed at the dirt, as though the land might give it mercy. His horse balked under him, hooves grinding into the grit. He pulled on the reins and let the stillness settle. Wind whispered through the grass like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. Far out, the prairie rolled in waves of dusk, soft gold tipping to rust. There was nothing for miles. Nothing but that figure sprawled in the open like a secret somebody. Left behind. Elias swung down from the saddle, boots striking hard. The weight of his Colt pressed against his thigh, a habit, a comfort, and sometimes a sin. His eyes, gray as winter rivers, narrowed on the stranger. A woman, by the look of her dress-torn calico, once white, now a map of dust and blood. Her bonnet was gone. Her hair dark, tangled clung to her cheeks in wild ropes. When he came close enough to cast a shadow over her, she stirred, slow, like something learning how to live again. "Don't move," he said. His voice was gravel and smoke. She froze. Breath fluttered against her lips like a bird, too tired to fly. Then, with what scraps of strength she had left, she lifted her face. Her eyes caught him hazel with flecks of gold, and there was a fight in them that didn't match the ruin of her body. She stared at the gun on his hip, then up at him, and her voice came, cracked and hoarse. "Please, don't shoot." He didn't answer, didn't trust the moment. This land had taught him everything was a trap, even kindness, especially kindness. The woman swallowed hard, winced, and tried to push herself upright. Failed. Her breath trembled between them. Then she spoke again, and her words cut like a blade honed in desperation. "I'll give you strong children if you spare me." The prairie held its breath. Elias did too. Something in those words dragged through him, raw and jagged, scraping places he'd buried years ago. He stared at her, trying to read if this was madness or bargain, truth or trick. The war had made beggars of men. Hunger had made liars of women. But this was something else. Her eyes weren't pleading the way he expected. They were steady, almost daring him to call her bluff. "Where's your man?" he asked finally. His voice had thorns in it. "Dead," she rasped. Or worse, he didn't press. 100 stories hid behind that answer, and none of them ended well. His hand hovered near the gun, not because she was a threat, but because the world was. Out here, everything came at a cost. Shelter, water, mercy, especially mercy. "Stand up," he said. "I can't." The words were thin, brittle as dry grass. Elias glanced around. The land stretched empty in every direction, the kind of emptiness that swallows, screams before they leave your mouth. He could leave her, right on. No one would know. No one would care. He'd done it before, closed his eyes, and let the prairie take what it wanted. That was the way of things. But something in her voice, that cracked edge of defiance, anchored his boots to the ground. He knelt, close enough now to smell the dust in her hair, the faint iron of blood. Her hands were small, fingers nicked and raw, nails rimmed with black. Survival carved its story into her skin. Without a word, he slid his arm under her shoulders. She stiffened, then sagged against him, like a rope cut from its knot. "Easy," he muttered. It wasn't gentleness, not exactly, just the sound of a man speaking to keep the silence from devouring them both. He lifted her, light as a bundle of stick sand, carried her to his horse. The animal stamped, nostrils flaring, as if it too sensed the weight of what Elias was doing. He set her in the saddle, swung up behind, his arms braced around her like iron bands. She shivered, though the evening air still burned warm. Or maybe it wasn't the cold that shook her. They rode without words, the prairie dimming to blue, then black. Stars blinked awake above them, sharp as buckshot. Elias felt her breath against his chest, shallow and quick. Each rise and fall of her ribs was a question he didn't know how to answer. Miles slid under them, until the shape of a town crawled out of the dark lamps, glowing soft in windows, the faint hum of life. When they reached the edge of Main Street, Elias slowed the horse. The town was small, the kind where every door had eyes behind it. He could already feel the stairs sharpening, the weight of judgment heavy as a noose. The boarding house squatted near the end of the street, its porch light swinging on a chain. Elias dismounted, then helped her down. She swayed, knees buckling, and for a moment, her head brushed his shoulder. He caught her elbow, steadying her. "Careful," he said. She blinked up at him. In the lamplight, her face looked carved from something both fragile and stubborn. Dirt streaked her cheeks, but her eyes. Lord, those eyes burned like embers that refused to die. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why didn't you leave me?" He looked at her a long time. The question crawled under his skin, found the hollow places. He could have said 100 things. None came. So he gave her the only truth he had. Couldn't, that was all. Couldn't. Because the sound of her voice out there in the dark had unsettled something buried deep. Because he'd spent too many nights staring into an empty sky, wondering what it would take to feel human again. The door creaked open, spilling a wash of yellow light. Marla stood there, gray hair twisted in a knot, eyes sharp enough to skin a man's lies. Her gaze swept from Elias to the woman, and her mouth pinched. "Lord help us," she said. "What's this you've dragged in?" "Somebody who needs a bed," Elias answered. Marla snorted. "And you think that's all she need?" Her eyes flicked back to the girl. "She's trouble, Elias. You can smell it on her." He didn't flinch. Just met Marla's stare, until the old woman sighed and stepped aside. "Fine, bring her in, but don't you start thinking you can save the world. It don't thank a man for trying." Inside, the air was thick with lamp smoke and the faint temps of soap. Elias guided the woman to a narrow bed in the corner. She sank onto it, bones trembling like reeds in a storm. He poured water from a jug, held it out. Her fingers brushed his as she took it, cool against his calloused skin. She drank deep, throat working, then set the cup down slow. "What's your name?" he asked. "Clara," a whisper, but steady. He nodded once. "Sleep, Clara. We'll talk come morning." As he turned to go, her voice stopped him, soft, but it cut through the hush like a knife. "Thank you." He paused in the doorway. For a breath, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. Then he stepped out into the hall, boots thudding against the worn boards. Night pressed close beyond the window. The prairie stretched out there still dark, endless, hungry. He knew the kind of secrets it kept, the kind of men it spat back when they'd been gone too long. Whatever Clara had run from, it wasn't done chasing her. And now, like a fool, he'd put himself square in its path. Elias touched the brim of his hat, jaw tight. The gun on his hip felt heavier than it had all day. Somewhere behind him, Clara lay curled under a borrowed quilt, eyes wide open in the dark. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring, but both could feel it like the charge before a storm, humming low and deep, promising that nothing in their lives would ever be the same. And for the first time in years, Elias wasn't sure if that scared him or saved him.